Earlier in our program, we talked about the military impact of the U.S. abandoning its Kurdish allies in Syria, but let's try and put a human face on the Kurds. President Trump only seems to know who they're not.
Kurds are fighting for their land, just so you understand. They're fighting for their land. And as somebody wrote in a very, very powerful article today, they didn't help us in the Second World War. They didn't help us with Normandy, as an example. They mentioned names of different battles. They were there, but they're there to help us with their land.
For the record, the Kurds didn't have their own country during World War II, and they still don't. Plus, we're now allies with countries that we fought against during the war, so I don't know why I'm even trying to make any sense out of that last statement, but nonetheless, don't give it any credence. The Kurds, however, did do our heavy lifting in Syria. They were the only reliable resistance group that we could count on to deal with the Syrian government, which, as you know, kept gassing its own people, as well as to combat ISIS. And until Trump abandoned them this week, the Kurds were still the ones guarding the captured 11,000+ ISIS fighters. For more, we're joined by Nader Hashemi. He's director of the Center for Middle East Studies and an assistant professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the University of Denver. Thank you, Professor. Let's first try and put a human face. The idea, there's so many problems with what we've done, but the absence of any notice to these folks that this was coming, and moreover, we had just given them an indication to pull down some of their defensive installations along the border because the implicit promise was we'll make sure the Turks don't come over the border. We've left these people completely stranded, and we've gone back on our word.
Yeah, I would agree with that characterization. I mean, if you listen to what people are saying from northeastern Syria, from the Kurdish population and the leadership of that population, they're feeling betrayed. Words such as, we feel like we've been stabbed in the back, let down. If you know the history, this is not the first time they've been let down, but I think this will have long-term consequences for the United States around the world, but specifically with respect to the Kurds.
We played a soundbite there from the president. He did this in transactional terms that, hey, they had their own issues and they were doing it for themselves. To that point, though, it made it sound like these were just a band of freedom fighters. Nonetheless, we've all seen the images. You're talking women and children, people being rushed out, and the point is they don't know where they're going to go.
Yeah, they have very few options. They obviously can't go to Turkey. The only other two options is to try and flee over the border into Iraq, which is unstable and uncertain. And then the other option is to flee into territory controlled by the murderous dictator Bashar al-Assad. This is one of the problems when a president is in power and he makes a impulsive decision. Potentially millions of people will have their lives seriously threatened because of that decision, and I think we're seeing that unfolding before our eyes today.
Let's talk about some of the winners and losers beyond, obviously, the Kurds. To me, I don't read this as any other way than this is welcome news in Tehran, in Moscow, even Assad. Seemingly the worst actors are being rewarded by this decision.
Yeah, and it's not the first time Trump has done this. I would add this to the long sort of list of foreign policy disasters just on the Middle East that Trump is responsible for. And so I think these developments are playing very well in Tehran and in Moscow and in Damascus, as you just indicated. The Kurds now, having been abandoned by the United States, the only real option that they have for protection and support is to try and strike some deal or bargain with the Assad regime and its key international backer Russia and its key regional actor Iran, who stand to benefit from a potential shift in power. And so this does not bode well for I think the region fundamentally. So this is just another phase of an ongoing, unfolding tragedy in Syria that has global consequences. The rise of ISIS, the Syrian refugee crisis. These things don't stay in the region, and I suspect we're going to see more fallout from these disastrous decisions coming from major world powers. This one just being the latest of a series of very bad decisions.
And you touched on it, but the idea that things neatly stay within the borders of a failed state is delusional. I got to imagine right now, Professor, if I'm sitting in Jordan or I'm in Israel, I'm saying, wait a minute, where's this thing going to cascade to? If there's, you define it as unrest in the region, I think that's putting it politely. This is like pouring accelerant on a fire.
Yeah, I mean, the region is already deeply destabilized. There was a sense that, having defeated ISIS, at least that was a sort of partial relief in the instability, at least in this one corner of the Middle East. As your viewers should know, the broader region is very destable for sort of different reasons. But, there's a good likelihood, this is why there's a lot of concern and criticism directed at the president, that this decision to effectively green light a Turkish incursion into northeastern Syria could lead to the resuscitation and the revitalization of ISIS, with global consequences, not just for the region. And then there is this other scenario that hasn't really gotten the attention that it deserves. That part of this plan that the president of Turkey has is to occupy this part of northeastern Syria, create some sort of safe zone, and then resettle hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Syrian refugees in this part of the world in a colossal act of demographic re-engineering that would just not only violate international law, but I think will simply further destabilize the Middle East.
Erdogan, because the criticism came, and it came globally, for what he's done, he basically said to Europe, oh, you don't like it? I'll throw millions of refugees into your neck of the woods, and then you deal with them, after he directly pushed back against the president saying, hey, I told Trump exactly what I was going to do. I telegraphed it, and we did it right now. That Erdogan seems to be acting with impunity here. I don't know that everyone should be shocked, but this will not be clean in any way. This will be bloody, I'm getting from your perspective, and this is only the first in what probably will be a multi-step, basically purge by the Turks here, to deal with the Syrians that are in country now, let alone where they're going to go into Syria, and seemingly they'll decide where they'll stop.
No, I agree. I mean, we have the key political actor in Ankara, who is widely known around the world correctly as an authoritarian populist leader. I mean, just look at the rhetoric that he's using. He's just threatening Europe that he's going to unleash Syrian refugees into Europe, using them as political pawns. I mean, this is something that's straight out of the authoritarian leader's playbook to sort of use that language. So he's the largest actor in the region. He has, he's a NATO member. He has a lot of military muscle at his disposal. And so he will pursue his own policies without any checks or any sort of, ability to scrutinize his behavior. And the tragedy here is that there were other options that could have been pursued. I think there could have been a way of negotiating some sort of agreement between Turkey's legitimate security concerns on its southern border with respect to separatist militia, but also not abandoning the Kurds and providing some, greater stability, at least for the short term, in this part of Syria. But it was all done away in this sort of very rash decision that Donald Trump made, and the rest of the Middle East is going to pay a big price for it, and possibly, the wider world, depending on how this process unfolds.
Professor, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.